a day Elijah had had. He must have laughed aloud as he ran along that rainy road. He had been part of a spectacular victory for pure worship that day, something that would live in his memory as long as he lived, and it lives in ours as well. Jehovah had used him to strike a deathly blow against this disgusting and brutal Baal worship that was prevalent in the land of his day. He had prayed for fire to descend from heaven to consume his sacrifice there on the crown of Mount Carmel, and it had happened. He had prayed to Jehovah to end a 3.5-year drought, and it had happened. Rain had fallen. But that wasn't the end of the day for him. As he ran towards Jezreel, the Bible says that the hand of Jehovah was upon him. So this old man running along the road started running faster and faster until he actually ran faster than Ahab's own chariot, pulled by the fastest horses in the land. He passed Ahab and ran 20 miles under Jehovah's strength all the way to Jezreel. What a day. And as it happens sometimes when things go right for us, our hopes get very high. Isn't that true? And surely Elijah's hopes were very, very high that day. So many things went right. So many good things had happened, one right after another. Elijah must have thought that for sure, finally things are going to change in this land. After all these years of hard work, finally we've turned a corner. Finally, this Baal worship with its sacrificing of children, its disgusting rituals, finally this is going to be cleared out of the land. Ahab, rotten, weakling king though he is going to have to go back home, and he's going to have to reign and put a stop to this Baal worship. But Elijah had to do more than just endure one exciting day. He had to endure to the end. And as we'll see, that's not always an easy thing to do. When he got home that night, he made it to Jezreel, well ahead of Ahab. He found himself lodging for the night, and apparently sometime in the night, before he could even get to sleep, there was a knocking on the door, and there was a message for him. And with this one message, all of those high hopes came crashing down in ruins. What happened? Well, if you turn to 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 1, let's see what happened. Ahab also got home that night, and the first thing he did was talk to his wife. 1 Kings 19:1, it says, "Then Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and all about how he had killed all the prophets with the sword." Do you think Ahab has changed? Notice what he reports to Jezebel. All that Elijah had done. Really? Elijah had brought fire down out of heaven? Elijah had brought rain down out of the sky? No, Jehovah had done these things. But Ahab never sees things in a spiritual way. He's a fleshly man to the very core. So this is what he reports to Jezebel, and he also reports to her the very thing that is likely to provoke her famous, vicious temper. He slaughtered your prophets. Imagine even having an ounce of sympathy for those wicked men. These were professional murderers of children that Elijah had executed that day. And yet she is infuriated. Her pride has been wounded, and she is absolutely outraged. Look how she responds in verse 2. At that, Jezebel sent a messenger. So this is the knock on the door that poor Elijah received that night. To say this, "So may the gods do, and so may they add to it, if at this time tomorrow I shall not make your soul like the soul of each one of them." Now, what is this wild woman on about? What is she saying? She's saying, she is swearing that she might as well die herself if she does not manage to have Elijah put to death, just as her beloved Baal prophets had been put to death. That's the message that Elijah receives. How do you think he felt? Verse 3, it says, "And he became afraid." Now, there are some ancient manuscripts that don't use that phrase. There's some ancient manuscripts of this book that say, and he got to see. And we're not sure which is accurate. That's why your reference Bible has that as a footnote, he got to see. In either case, they both shed light on what happened to Elijah. He got to see. He got to see or think about, see in his mind's eye, that things had not changed, that his hopes had been too high. You see? He got to see or think about what danger he really was in now. Ahab had not changed. Jezebel had not changed. She wants to kill me. She is swearing to kill me. He knew that she had managed to have put to death dozens, scores, perhaps hundreds of Jehovah's faithful prophets, men whom he no doubt had known and loved. He got to see. He saw it in his mind's eye. He knew how vicious these people were. The result? Exactly what our translation says in other ancient manuscripts. He became afraid. It reminds us of the Apostle Peter. Most of us remember the account when Jesus was walking on the water. And Peter was so excited. He said, Lord, can I do it too? In fact, right? Lord, let me come out there. Jesus said, okay, come on. And you remember for a while it worked. Peter actually walked on the water, briefly. We also remember that he started sinking. Do you remember why? Well, he too got to see. Because the scripture says, but looking at the windstorm, he became afraid. Instead of looking at Jesus, the one source of hope for him in that situation, he looked at those crashing waves and the wind, and he got scared. And as he got afraid, what happened to his faith? His faith sank. And he sank with it. Right? And so it was with Elijah. He became afraid. He dwelt on his fears. It had a devastating effect on his faith. And so here, this normally very bold, forthright man turns and runs for his life. That's what you see in verse 3. Consequently, he rose up and began to go for his soul. And he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. Then he left his attendant behind there. Yes, he ran. He ran for mile after mile after mile. And now, not that warm hand of Jehovah on him, giving him superhuman strength, but the cold, clammy hand of fear guiding his every step. He was panic-stricken, and so he ran these 95 miles down south to Beersheba. Are you disillusioned? Disappointed with him? Does this mean he's a bad man? A failure? James 5:17 shed so much light on Elijah's life course. We considered it the last time we talked about Elijah. Do you remember how that verse started out? Elijah was a man with feelings like ours. If you had a world leader swear to put you to death, do you think you might be a little nervous about it? I think I might. He was scared. Doesn't mean he's bad. It means he's a human being. And his fear has squashed his faith at this point. And look how low this situation brings him. Look at verse 4. It says, and he himself went into the wilderness a day's journey, and at length came and sat under a certain broom tree, and he began to ask that his soul might die, and to say, it is enough. Now, O Jehovah, take my soul away, for I am no better than my forefathers. What does he mean, no better than my forefathers? Well, his forefathers were where? They were in the grave. They were dust. They couldn't do any good for anybody. He knew that well. And that's how he felt. Worthless. I'm no good. I'm of no use to anybody. I might as well die. So, Satan has gotten him to think in this profoundly negative and destructive way. And it is devastating. No wonder it has brought him down to this terribly low ebb where he says it is enough. He actually wants to die. This faithful man wants to die, wishes for death, asks Jehovah to put his soul to death. In fact, he's walked a day's journey out into the wilderness. He apparently didn't bring any food or water with him. He's acting like somebody who doesn't want to live. Are you shocked? You know, this is not unique to Elijah. In my research in the Hebrew Scriptures, I came across a number of faithful men and women who felt this way at one point or another in their lives. Rebecca is recorded that she felt this way twice, wished for death. Jacob, Rachel, Moses, Job, David, Jonah. Every one of these individuals actually wished for death. At some point in their life, they were brought that low. Now, interestingly, none of them acted on those feelings. There's not a one of them who actually took their own life. The reason we know how they felt is because they did something else far more productive. They poured out those feelings to Jehovah, and it's written and it's recorded for us. And that's important. Now, we hope that none of us are ever brought to that low an ebb in life, but this is a tough world, and we can be brought pretty low. So we need to do what Elijah did, what these other faithful individuals have done. Turn to Jehovah. The song we sang about spoke of Jehovah as the God of all comfort, scriptural thought. And Jehovah is able to comfort, and comfort is a key to enduring to the end. It's what Elijah needed to do. It's what each of us needs to do. So let's consider how Jehovah works with this depressed prophet. Let's look in verses 5 and 6. See what happens here. It says, "Finally Elijah lay down and fell asleep under the broom tree. But now, look, an angel was touching him. Then he said to him, 'Rise up, eat.'" Can you imagine that kind of a wake-up call? An angel of Jehovah God gently touching him, saying, "Rise up, eat." Eat what? This angel has prepared a meal for Elijah. See in verse 6, "When he looked, why, there at his head, right by him, was a round cake upon heated stones and a jug of water. And he began to eat and drink, after which he lay down again." Isn't that touching to think of that? This mighty spirit being is sent all the way from heaven itself to fix a meal for this faithful prophet. And we have no reason to believe that he just, made it come poof into existence. He might well have done the physical work of preparing this meal. We say that because we know Jesus Christ himself, as a mighty resurrected spirit being, cooked for his apostles. Do you remember that? He cooked some fish on the beach for them, willing to do this humble work for fellow faithful servants of Jehovah. Isn't that a beautiful example for us? Who of us could ever say about someone who's depressed or low in their spirits, "Oh, I have no time for that person. I don't have time for that. I don't waste my time. I have more important things to do." Think of it. Jehovah sends these mighty spirit beings to come down and do this humble service. So who of us is too important to do humble service for one another? It's a beautiful example, isn't it? Reminds us, too, of Jesus washing the feet of his apostles. Who of us could say, too, that we have no time for the depressed? We shouldn't have that attitude, should we? Notice that Elijah doesn't necessarily even say thank you. All it says is he began to eat and drink and lay down again. He may have been so low in his spirits that even this wonderful thing happening to him didn't shake him out of it. And there's nothing in the record that says the angel said, hey, what about a thank you here? No. He just said, "Eat." And then Elijah lay down and went back to sleep. And later the angel wakes him up again. Verse 7, "Came back a second time, touched him, and said, 'Rise up, eat.'" And this added thought, "For the journey is too much for you." What journey? What is he talking about here? Well, it's evident that the angel knew where Elijah was heading, meaning that Jehovah had informed the angel. How did Jehovah know? He read his heart. He knew exactly where Elijah was going. Elijah was running for his life. He wanted to run way in the distance in the wilderness. He was going to end up at Mount Horeb. Jehovah knew exactly where he was going. And that's a good point for us to remember, too, because Jehovah knows your journey and my journey, right? He reads our hearts as well. He knows where we're going. He knows what we're up to. He knows what burdens we're carrying. And do you notice that beautiful thought here? He knows what's too much for us. The journey is too much for you. He knows our limitations. He knows exactly what you and I are capable of. And he never expects more of us than we're able to do. And he gives us what we need in order to accomplish our journey, as long as it's in harmony with his will. He remembers our limitations, as Psalm 103:17 says, right? He knows that we are dust. Now, this second meal was unlike the first, apparently. There was something miraculous to it. Look what happened. Verse 8. It says, "So Elijah rose up and ate and drank, and he kept going in the power of that nourishment for 40 days and 40 nights, as far as the mountain of the true God, Horeb." He becomes the first Israelite on record to return to that famous starting point where the nation had covenanted with Jehovah God to be in this Mosaic law covenant. And interestingly, this experience that he has of going for 40 days and 40 nights without any food or water links him with two other figures in the Bible. Can you think of who they are? Who are the other two that go without food or water? 40 days and 40 nights. I hear the words. You're whispering them. Jesus and Moses. Now, interestingly, who are the three represented at the Transfiguration? Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Very important scriptural figures, and this is one of the many similarities that ties them together and shows us there's great prophetic significance to Moses and Elijah. But beyond the prophetic significance, let's think about the practical side of it. What must this have been like for Elijah to trek through this wilderness in the scorching heat, no doubt? It's nearly 200 miles. And for 40 days, that's almost 6 weeks. Every day he wakes up, not hungry, not thirsty. He kept going in the power of that one meal, day after day after day. Now, what did that food do for him? Did it make his problems go away? Did it solve the depression, the lowness of spirits that he was suffering from? Do you picture him out in the wilderness kind of dancing and singing, the hills are alive, right, like the Sound of Music? No, sorry. It's not quite like that, because when he arrives at his destination, he is still very low in his spirits. And there's an important lesson in that for us, friends, because Jehovah also gives us what we need to sustain us, doesn't he? He gives us not a literal meal by an angel, but he gives us spiritual food. We call it that, and rightly so. Does that spiritual food make all our problems go away? Is it a magic pill that will make depression go away or family problems go away? No, not necessarily. But it will sustain us. And isn't it true sometimes we've gone through a very difficult period in life, and we look back over it afterwards and we realize, only then, looking back, Jehovah really did carry me. Staying faithful at the meetings, faithful in service, faithfully close to my brothers and sisters, reading the magazines as they came out. That really did keep me going, didn't it? And if you're about to go through such a hard time, or if you're in one right now, ask anyone who has endured a long time in the truth. They'll tell you the same thing. Jehovah will sustain you, but you must keep nourishing yourself on what he provides. Where would Elijah have been if he had not eaten that meal provided by the angel? We need that if we're going to endure. Now in verse 9, it says that finally Elijah entered into a cave. He's reached his destination. He enters into a cave that he might spend the night there. And look, there was Jehovah's word for him. And it went on to say to him, "What is your business here, Elijah?" Interestingly, it doesn't say that an angel spoke to him here. It says Jehovah's word, which makes us wonder, is it possible that this was Jesus in his pre-human existence? Of course, in the Greek, he is referred to as the Word. It's possible, we don't really know, but we do know that this gentle, probing question does remind us of Jesus' kind, loving personality. Remember, the things he was fond of were with the sons of men. So he's gently, in a sense, asking him to unburden himself. Right? What is your business here? In effect means, what's going on? What are you up to? And Elijah responds to the invitation in a big way. He opens his mouth and he unburdens himself. He says everything that is weighing him down. Verse 10, he says, "I have been absolutely jealous for Jehovah, the God of armies, for the sons of Israel have left your covenant. Your altars they have torn down, and your prophets they have killed with the sword, so that I only am left. And they begin looking for my soul to take it away." He's bared his soul here. He's poured out his feelings, honest, unedited, and three things emerge. Number one, he reveals that he feels that his work has been in vain. It has been a waste, right? I have been working so hard for so long, and look what's going on in the land. It has been a waste. Maybe that's why he feels worthless, right? No better than his forefathers. Secondly, he feels completely alone. He says, "I alone am left. They've killed all the faithful ones. I'm all by myself." That's a terrible feeling to carry around. You know, it's not actually true. Jehovah has not left Elijah all alone in the land. But this is how he feels. And that negative thinking pattern is no doubt doing a lot of damage to his spirits. And it is a debilitating feeling. Third, he feels afraid. He's terrified. You see that? They begin looking for my soul to take it away. They're out to kill me. He is scared. He is scared out of his wits. And for a brave and tough man, as he no doubt was, to reveal this feeling was perhaps not easy. But this is what's in his heart, and he opens up to Jehovah and tells him the whole thing. Good example for us as well. Now, verse 11 and 12, we see the spirit being's answer. And this is one of the most mysterious and fascinating passages, I think, in the Hebrew Scriptures. It said to him, "Go out, and you must stand on the mountain before Jehovah." And look, Jehovah was passing by, and a great and strong wind was rending mountains and breaking crags before Jehovah. Jehovah was not in the wind. And after the wind there was a quaking. Jehovah was not in the quaking. And after the quaking there was a fire. Jehovah was not in the fire. And after the fire there was a calm, low voice. We can barely imagine this awesome spectacle. Whether it was a vision or whether it happened in real physical reality, we don't know for sure. What we do know is it doesn't matter. It was entirely real to Elijah. So first he sees the effects of this incredible wind. A wind so powerful that it could actually tear apart crags, parts of mountains. Awesome, staggering power. Now we see in the news sometimes the effects of hurricanes, a wind of 170 to 200 miles an hour. The effects are devastating. Sometimes you see photographs of a good-sized ship that's left about a mile inland after such a storm. Well, that hurricane wind could not tear apart mountains, friends. No way. Not even close. So what Elijah saw was far more powerful than that. There are such winds, even in our own solar system. The prevailing winds at the equator on the planet Neptune are about 1,500 miles an hour. Now, a wind like that might indeed rip a mountain out by its roots and blow it around like a dried-up leaf. Something like that is what Elijah saw. Staggering. And then he sees this quaking. Anybody who survived an earthquake will tell you it is an awesome thing to see the earth that you count on for being still and steady and rock solid, to see it moving in waves. The awesome forces that are unleashed there. Or similarly, anybody who's seen a great fire, that's the next thing he sees, this tremendous fire raging by. Awe-inspiring demonstration of raw power. And yet, did you notice each time we're informed, and perhaps Elijah was informed too, that Jehovah was not in these natural phenomena? What's the point to that? Well, we learn a great deal about Jehovah from His creation, don't we? We learn about His power, His strength, His wisdom, His majesty. But we need to remember that He is greater than what He makes. He's not in His creation. Remember, the people of Elijah's day actually thought of their gods being in natural phenomena. They did believe in a God in the sun and in the moon and in the rain and so forth. Baal was the rain god. But Jehovah's reminding Elijah, and us too, of course, He is greater than what He has made. The most awesome thing you can think of in the natural world, as staggering as it is nothing compared to its Creator. When Elijah looked up at a sky packed with stars at night, if he worked hard, he could have counted them. He would have counted about 2,000 on a really clear night. Today, astronomers with their powerful telescopes know that's a tiny fraction. As awesome as what Elijah saw was, think of it today. When you look up at the night sky and you see the Milky Way galaxy, you know what that is. It's the edge of our own galaxy. That was just a hazy band to Elijah. To us, we know it's a giant swirling congress of over 100 billion stars. So huge we can barely fathom the size. They say that light travels at 186,000 miles every second, right? Well, if you could stand on the edge of our galaxy and turn on a flashlight, the beam of light races across our galaxy at that colossal speed, 186,000 miles every second. And it goes tearing along through space. And you know how long it takes it to get to the other end of our galaxy? 100,000 years. And that's just our galaxy. It's one of billions, tens, perhaps even 100 billion. And yet Jehovah's not in our galaxy. Solomon said, the heavens of the heavens cannot contain you. He's greater than anything that He's made. What's the point? For Elijah, as for us, the point is, imagine the shoulders of the one who created all these things. Are they big enough to handle our problems? You see, could our problems be too heavy for Him? Too complicated for Him? Never, never, never. And if we feel that way, we need to bolster and build up our faith so that we'll have the confidence in Him to roll our burden onto Him, trust Him to help us to endure. And no doubt this did a great deal to help Elijah to endure, this powerful demonstration. But it ended, as you noticed, it said after the fire there was a calm, low voice. The Septuagint version adds, and Jehovah was there. Whether that belongs there or not, the point is valid. In this calm, low voice, in Jehovah's own words, in His instruction, we learn more about Jehovah even than from His creation. And so Elijah was about to as well. Yes, what we have in this calm, low voice, Jehovah's own word, is better than any miracle we could ever witness with our own eyes. Here is where we learn about Jehovah, and here's where we can get comfort from Him. Now, when this calm, low voice occurred, what happened? Verse 13, it says, it came about that as soon as Elijah heard it, he immediately wrapped his face in his official garment and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Now, wait a minute. Wasn't he told to go out and stand at the entrance of the cave earlier? What happened? You guessed it. I hear you chuckling. It was so spectacular that it sent him back in that cave. He was hiding in there, right? Huddled up somewhere. And this voice had to gently lure. It's safe. You can come back out now, right? He comes back out. He ventures to the edge of the cave. And the voice speaks to him again. It says, "What is your business here, Elijah?" Well, that's the exact same question that he had been asked earlier. And interestingly, in verse 14, it's a word-for-word repeat of verse 10. Elijah pours out his feelings once again, and he says precisely the same things that he has said before. But what do we learn from that? Well, for one thing, that somebody pouring out their feelings once may not be the end of the matter. He needed to do it again. And Jehovah understood that. He gently probed and let Elijah say it all over again. And Jehovah patiently listened. He doesn't stop and say, wait a minute, I heard all that before. No, he listens. What a beautiful example for us too. But now in verses 15 through 18, Jehovah begins to address the problems that are causing Elijah's depression. You see how he does this. Jehovah now said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and you must come in and anoint Hazael as king over Syria. And Jehu, the grandson of Nimshi, you should anoint as king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah, you should anoint as prophet in place of you. And it must occur that the one escaping from Hazael's sword, Jehu will put to death. And the one escaping from Jehu's sword, Elisha will put to death. And I have let 7,000 remain in Israel, all the knees that have not bent down to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." It's amazing how many people misunderstand this passage. According to some commentators, it's as if God's angry at Elijah. "Oh, you coward, you ran away from Jezebel. As a result, I'm going to fire you. You're fired. Just get back to work, finish up, but you're fired. I'm going to replace you with Elisha." Completely missing the point of what Jehovah is doing here. Notice, first of all, what he does. He is unfolding in verse 16 his long-range purpose. He's allowing Elijah this confidential information now, letting him know that Ahab is going to be replaced. This wickedness that you see in the land, it's going to come to an end. I see it. And he's letting Elijah know that he has a place in Jehovah's purpose. He has work yet to do. How could he be worthless if Jehovah himself has a job for him and work yet to do? What else? Well, here this matter of Elisha and anointing him. Does that mean that Elijah is fired? Oh no, that's not the way Jehovah works. Elijah's going to take this younger man under his wing and he's going to train him until he is qualified and ready to replace the older man. Do you remember how Elijah told Jehovah, "I'm all alone"? Jehovah's solving the problem. He's giving him a partner, somebody to work with and share the burdens with. And it's going to be years that they're going to work together until they're parted. Isn't that a beautiful answer to Elijah's problems? Furthermore, in verse 18, he lets Elijah in on a very confidential report. We know that Jehovah searches all hearts on the face of this earth. He doesn't usually let us in on the results of that search. But he does here with Elijah. He tells him, "I have found 7,000 hearts, in effect, right, in this land that are still faithful, that still love me," as Jehovah is saying. How comforting for Elijah to know that there are that many faithful people. So he has plenty of work yet to do, and he will have companionship and support among people who also love Jehovah. So as we conclude this passage, we might just ask ourselves, what do we learn from Jehovah's example here? And what can we apply? I've gleaned 4 basic points how we can imitate Jehovah in this matter of trying to comfort somebody who is low in spirits. Number 1, you see that Jehovah offered practical comfort. He made sure that Elijah got the food he needed and the rest he needed. Very simple, very practical. He took the initiative. He didn't wait for Elijah to come to him and ask for these things, but he saw the need and he went to address it in a kind way. That's a beautiful example. Just running an errand for somebody, finding out a practical way that you can help out in a time of need can do a world of good, sometimes good that will never be forgotten. Secondly, listen, listen, listen. That's how the Watchtower put it, right? Do you see what a good listener Jehovah is in this instance? How he probed gently and allowed Elijah to pour out his feelings, not once, but twice. Patiently listened to him. And as he listened, he didn't judge him. He didn't tell him, oh, you're wrong to feel that way. Right? Don't say that. Don't feel that way. We don't hear any of that. He doesn't say something like, why aren't you more like Noah? He never whined at me like this. Right? No, I don't hear a hint of that. We don't hear anything like, if you were just busy or in service to me, you wouldn't be depressed like this. Easy thing to say. But the fact is, Elijah had never been busier in his life in serving Jehovah than he was at this very time, when his hopes came crashing down and he fell into this depression. Being busy in Jehovah's service is a wonderful thing, and it can do marvels for our spirits, but it's not a magic cure to depression. Depression can strike all kinds of people, faithful and unfaithful. It's just like physical illness can sometimes. So we don't want to fall into simplistic or judgmental, harsh comments, but be a patient listener. The third point ties in with this. When we speak consolingly. There's no question that Jehovah's words consoled Elijah. And if you've ever been in the position of trying to comfort somebody who's feeling really low, you know that's not easy to do. I've been in that position where I've tried to help somebody who's feeling low and actually felt worse when I was done talking with them. That's a terrible feeling. So what can help us to speak consolingly? One thing is to be sensitive. If what you're saying is hurting the person, you'll see it on their face. And if you can't see it on their face, ask them, is this helping? If it's not, then shut up. Right? Change the subject. Try a different tack. Don't say, well, listen, it should help because I'm right and this better. No. We don't read their hearts, so like Jehovah, he knew exactly what would console, but we may not be sure. So find out. Ask. Tell me how to help, right? Another thing that will really help is keep up to date with what the society publishes. So much work and research has gone into those articles that deal with such matters as depression, child abuse, things that cause profound emotional problems, alcoholism, family problems. The list goes on and on. If we're in harmony with what the society has published, we're much more likely to speak words that really will console instead of hurting. Fourth point, help to identify and correct wrong thinking patterns. Now, this is something we want to do carefully and gently, but you notice how Jehovah did with Elijah. Elijah felt like he was all alone. It wasn't the truth. Jehovah let him know that he wasn't alone. Elijah felt like he was worthless. Right? I'm no better than my forefathers. Jehovah let him know he had value. He had a place in his purpose. He had important work to do, and Jehovah was pleased with him. We too can do the same for our brothers and sisters. Let them know that they have value, that they're valued in the congregation, that you value them. You see, that can do wonders for somebody who's low in their spirits. And as we comfort our brothers and sisters, we will help them endure. And that will help us as well. Why? Because we may be the very next one who needs some comfort. We live in a tough world, and we never know what calamity is going to come our way tomorrow. If we're one who comforts others, we're very likely to be one who is comforted in a time of need. And that will help us endure as well. Well, Jehovah's comfort, of course, is perfect. It always works, and it worked on Elijah. In verses 19 through 21, we see that Elijah, whether it was suddenly or gradually, we see that he's back on his feet and back on the job. It says that he went from there. First thing he does is goes to find Elisha, and it says that he crossed over to him and threw his official garment on him. A humble gesture showing that he knows that this younger man is eventually going to receive this responsibility that has been on his shoulders. And we learn a little bit about Elisha here too. We see Elijah's humility, but what about Elisha? Does he now shoulder the older man aside and say, okay, Pops, it's my turn, right? I'm going to be in the limelight now. No, look at verse 21. It says, after that, Elisha rose up and went following Elijah and began to minister to him. Elisha was known as the one who would pour water on the hands of Elijah, doing this humble service of actually helping the older man wash his hands, right? Humble service. A beautiful example in the congregations today for younger brothers to assist older brothers. Help them out. Be humble. Take whatever load off their shoulders that you can. Don't be too eager. Don't ever try to make them feel like they're useless, pushing them aside. And older brothers as well, be like Elijah. Humbly be willing to pass on and confer responsibility, training up these younger men so they can take some of the load off your shoulders. We need it, don't we? Well, these two friends are going to help one another endure. And that's a key to endurance for all of us. Good friends, faithful friends. And Elijah and Elisha are going to need it because they have a great deal to endure. The wickedness of Ahab and Jezebel, well, it just goes from bad to worse. In 1 Kings chapter 20, we'll just summarize, but we see Ahab's materialism coming more and more to the fore in this chapter. Jehovah actually uses this wicked apostate king to serve him. He uses Ahab, commissions him to go to war against Ben-Hadad of Syria, and he grants him victory. He grants Ahab a victory. Think of it. And all he does, he tells Ahab, you have to follow my instructions. You have to put this Ben-Hadad to death. Jehovah's determined that he should be executed. Well, guess what? Ahab knows better than Jehovah. He refuses. He doesn't put Ben-Hadad to death. Rather, it says that he has streets or markets, apparently, named after him in Ben-Hadad's hometown. The insight brings out this evidently meant that Ahab spared Ben-Hadad's life for the sake of money. Again, he's a materialist. And so he disobeys Jehovah so that he can have this commerce flowing into his coffers back in Israel. Well, in chapter 21, this materialism goes from bad to worse yet, because he was rebuked for that disobedience, but he only responded by sulking. He didn't learn. And so in chapter 21, we see another example of this materialism. It says there that after these things there was a vineyard that happened to belong to Naboth, a Jezreelite, which was in Jezreel, beside the palace of Ahab, the king of Samaria. So Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, do give me your vineyard, that it may serve as a garden of vegetables to me, for it is close by my house. In other words, this would be very convenient for me to have your vineyard. This is the way Ahab thinks, right? I want this thing. Give it to me. He offers something in trade. Verse 3, Naboth will have nothing to do with it. He says, it is unthinkable on my part from Jehovah's standpoint. He refuses. What happens? Look at the end of verse 4. This is how Ahab responds. He goes back home and it says, he lay down on his couch and kept his face turned, and he did not eat bread. What a baby. Isn't that a pathetic example of a grown man? He doesn't get his way, so he actually goes and sulks, lies on his bed, curls up with his face to the wall, and he won't eat. That is sad. Well, now, what about this Naboth? What is his problem? He knows that this king is a vicious man. When he's cornered, he can be a terror. And his wife is worse yet. Why not just give him the stupid vineyard? It's just a possession, just a piece of land. Is it worth risking your life? Well, he said that it was unthinkable from Jehovah's standpoint. Why does Jehovah care about this vineyard? He does care, in fact, because as Naboth says, this is his hereditary possession. And the Mosaic law forbade them to sell in perpetuity a hereditary possession. It is a beautiful law because it prevented any family of Israel from falling into destitution, absolute poverty. They always had a basic inheritance they could pass along from one generation to the next. So out of respect for Jehovah's law, Naboth stands up to the very king of the land and says, I can't do it. It's unthinkable. He must have been one of those 7,000 Jehovah spoke about, right? Who would not bend his knee to Baal. This was a faithful, righteous, and a brave man. And he's going to pay a price for it. Verse 5, Jezebel comes in to Ahab, asks why he's sulking. And Ahab whines out his answer in verse 6. I proceeded to speak with Naboth and said, do give me your vineyard. But he said, I shall not give you my vineyard. You can just hear him whining, right? And in verse 7, Jezebel hits her husband where it hurts the most. She says, is it you that now exercise kingship over Israel? She gets him right in the ego, right? What kind of a king are you? Are you a man or not? She wants something out of this situation, doesn't she? And we'll see what it is. She says, rise up, eat bread, let your heart be merry. I myself shall give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember, she hates the worship of Jehovah, and she hates righteous individuals. And she's going to take a swipe at both. She hatches an ugly plot, described in verses 8 through 10. All she needs are two good-for-nothing men to do something according to Jehovah's law. Accuse Naboth of blasphemy. And the law says that at the mouth of two accusers, let every matter be established. She knows that law, apparently. And all she needs are two good-for-nothing men. Do you think she was able to rustle up two good-for-nothing men in the whole city? Sadly, there's never been a shortage of good-for-nothing men. These men had the mentality that, well, the queen wants it. I'm just following orders. The same kind of logic that some of the Nazi leaders used in World War II, right? We were just doing what we were told, just following orders. Didn't hold up in court after the war, did it? It doesn't hold up before Jehovah either. Those good-for-nothing men are in the Bible record for what they did, because they carried out her scheme. They accused Naboth of blasphemy in front of a group of people at a gathering, and Jezebel got her way. According to Jehovah's own law, this man was dragged out and he was stoned to death. And it's not in this account, but in the account in 2 Kings, there's another facet to this ugly tragedy. He didn't die alone. It says there that Naboth and his sons were executed. Remember, it was a hereditary possession. There would be no point in killing Naboth if his sons were still alive, because the possession would revert to them on his death. She knew that too, and had them slaughtered as well. These faithful, innocent people. Can you imagine how discouraging that must have been for any faithful people in the land at that time? Those other 7,000 who had not bent their knee to Baal, to see wickedness actually seem to triumph. We must remember, of course, this is war that we're in. It's all-out war between Jehovah and Satan, right? Between Satan's seed and the seed of Jehovah, between all the faithful and all the unfaithful. And there are casualties in this war. Happily, though, there are a number of times in the Bible record where Jehovah steps in to let all mankind know that he will hold everyone to account for how they act during these times. And this happens to be one of those times. You see in verse 17, it says, Jehovah's word came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Rise up, go down to meet Ahab the king of Israel, who is in Samaria. There he is, in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. And you must speak to him, saying, This is what Jehovah has said. Have you murdered and also taken possession? And you must speak to him, saying, In the place where the dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, the dogs will lick up your blood, even yours. That's a scary assignment. That's what Elijah's got to do. He's got to go right before this vicious, materialistic king and pronounce this message of judgment to him. But as we learned in our last discussion of Elijah, his name means, My God is Jehovah. He lives those words. He's obedient. And so we see Elijah immediately goes and he finds Ahab. We see that in verse 20. Ahab proceeded to say to Elijah, Have you found me, O enemy of mine? To which Elijah said, I have found you. What an encounter. Ahab probably thought that this old man was dead by now. He was out of his life, had been for some time. And here he's appeared. And Ahab is caught. Have you found me? Caught red-handed. He is right in Naboth's vineyard. Apparently he had jumped right to it, right, gone into play with this new toy that he'd finally gotten a hold of without a trace of regret or remorse over it. But do you see how ridiculous We see that in verse 20. Ahab proceeded to say to Elijah, "Have you found me, O enemy of mine?" To which Elijah said, "I have found you." What an encounter. Ahab probably thought that this old man was dead by now. He was out of his life, had been for some time, and here he's appeared. And Ahab is caught. "Have you found me?" Caught red-handed. He is right in Naboth's vineyard. Apparently he had jumped right to it, right, gone in to play with this new toy that he'd finally gotten hold of without a trace of regret or remorse over it. But do you see how ridiculous his words are? "Have you found me?" It's only when a man catches him red-handed in the act that he realizes he's been caught. When was he caught? He was caught from the very start. And tragically, he doesn't see any of it. How ridiculous that makes him. "Have you found me?" What a fool. It reminds me in a more humorous vein of a story I heard once. A congregation down south, the brothers had just installed these cordless microphones, and they were kind of newfangled things to the brothers at that time. And a young ministerial servant who was handling the microphones during the Watchtower study needed to use the men's room. So he tucked the microphone under his arm and he went into the men's room. Right? Well, no. Forget about the embarrassing noises. That's nothing. When he was all done, he set the microphone by the sink and he washed his hands, and in the silence there where he's about to comb his hair, he looked in the mirror and he said, "Boy, you are one handsome devil." And you just imagine the gales of laughter that greeted him as he emerged from the men's room. The whole congregation was just roaring with laughter. The Watchtower conductor said, "Would that handsome young devil please get the microphone over to row number 4? Right? Well, I think one of the things that makes us laugh at that poor young brother is that he doesn't realize he has an audience. And isn't it true that any of us can fall into that predicament? Our job is to endure, which means to stay on a road of faithful, obedient service to Jehovah. But we can slip off the road. We can sin. In fact, we do sin every day. What we need to remember, of course, is that we have an audience. If we think we're by ourselves, and if I just hush this up, no one will know. Especially if it's a serious matter. If we think we've gotten away with it, our thinking is crazy. Jehovah, the God of the universe, saw it. Jesus saw it. Perhaps tens of millions of angels were watching. They saw it. They know about it. If we act like nobody hears us, nobody sees us, we're going to act like nuts. It's crazy. And that's how Ahab is acting. "Have you found me, O enemy of mine?" And you notice that added thought? "O enemy of mine." Elijah was the one person on earth who could help him at this moment. Help him get back on some form of track of righteousness. He would never been close to one, but he could have helped him. But no, he's his enemy. And tragically, some who fall into serious sin not only have this idea that nobody saw me, I haven't been caught, but those who do try to help them, usually the elders of the congregation, they view them as enemies. They even blame them sometimes when they try to reach out and help them to get back on the road. Let us never fall into that kind of thinking, friends. Let us always remember, whether we sin in a small way or a big way, we had an audience. We were already caught. If it's a serious matter, we must get help from Jehovah's servants, the elders, so we can get back on a track of faithful service. That way we can endure. Well, in verses 20 to 26, we see Elijah pronouncing the sentence on Ahab, and it is an absolutely devastating sentence. It is an extermination of Ahab's entire household, and he goes through it point by point by point, that it is every man from Ahab's family. It involves his wife Jezebel in verse 23, that the dogs will eat up her corpse in Jezreel. In verse 25, he exposes the fact that Jehovah watched everything that was going on in that dysfunctional little household of Ahab and Jezebel. Did you see that? Ahab sold himself to do what was bad in the eyes of Jehovah, whom Jezebel his wife egged on. Jehovah had seen the whole thing. And the sentence now means devastation for the entire family. So finally, Elijah sees an end in sight to the wickedness of this dynasty. But how does Ahab react to this sentence? It's interesting. Verses 27 to 29, we learn there that he ripped his garments apart. It says he put out sackcloth on his flesh. He went on a fast. He was lying down in sackcloth, walking despondently. So Jehovah responds in verses 28 and 29. He says to Elijah, have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself on my account? For the reason that he's humbled himself because of me, I shall not bring the calamity in his own days. In the days of his son, I shall actually bring the calamity upon his house. Now this I find very interesting because first question is, what's happening here? Is Ahab repenting? Is this repentance? Sackcloth? Well, interestingly, Jehovah doesn't say that Ahab is repentant. He says Ahab has humbled himself. And the two are not quite the same. Ahab is frightened. He's devastated over what's going to happen to him. But repentance means turning around, doesn't it? Does Ahab reign in Jezebel? Does he go to war against Baal worship in his land? Manasseh made that kind of turnaround. Manasseh repented. Ahab is not repenting here. Or if he is, it's a little tiny bit of repentance. A little sliver of it, right? How does Jehovah respond? Total forgiveness, full mercy. No. A sliver of mercy, right? That corresponds to Ahab's sliver of repentance. He says, in effect, the whole sentence is still going to be carried out, but Ahab will not witness the destruction of his family. It'll happen after he is dead and gone. It's an interesting example, isn't it? Because we've studied Jehovah's justice in the Watchtower. We had it summarized beautifully with that statement that Jehovah's justice means mercy where possible, firmness where necessary. And I thought this is a beautiful example of that. Jehovah finds one little bit of room for mercy, and he makes an effort to show it there. But for the most part, here it's firmness where necessary. Right? Ahab is not changed, and so Jehovah must act firmly. Beautiful example for elders to look for ways, even small ways, of showing mercy wherever possible. Having that kind of spirit in the congregation, the friends don't fear the elders as punishers, but rather know that they're seeking to show mercy wherever possible. That helps the friends endure as well. Well, the sentence is carried out nonetheless. In chapter 22, Ahab is fooled by an angel to die in battle. And we see that in verse 28. He dies just as prophesied. The dogs lick the blood up out of his chariot. Poetic justice. Jehovah never forgot that faithful man, Naboth. Proving again, of course, that Naboth will be with us again in the resurrection, as will his sons. But Jezebel's still alive. She has a son who's a weakling and under her control. She has a daughter and a son-in-law, both of whom are also evidently under her control. And that means that Elijah and Elisha still have to endure. They have to endure to the end. So their endurance, now we're going to break down into three sections. Elijah's in particular. He has to endure three final assignments. So let's go through them one by one. First of the three. It becomes Elijah's job to judge Ahab's son, Ahaziah. Ahaziah is described in the very last words of this book, 1 Kings 22, verses 52 and 53. You might have had hopes that, well, if this kid saw what idiots his parents had made of themselves, how foolish they had been in rebelling against Jehovah, fighting against pure worship, if his head wasn't a total block of wood, maybe he had learned something, right? Sadly, no, nothing like it. You see that in those verses. He continued serving Baal, bowing down to him, and kept offending Jehovah. According to all that his father had done, he imitated his father. What a tragedy. And so Elijah is going to end up having to judge him by Jehovah's decree. So in 2 Kings verse 2, before that even comes up, time and unforeseen occurrence takes a hand. And this time it's something good. Not always the case, but an accident occurs. It's actually a good thing. This wicked man, Ahaziah, has an accident. He falls through the roof chamber of his house, and he's terribly ill as a result. Well, in the face of this illness, what does he do? Humble himself? Turn to Jehovah at last? No. Sadly, he sends messengers and says to them, "Go inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall revive from this sickness." Again, a deliberate slap in the face of Jehovah, the God of their land. He sends his messengers out to this Philistine god, Baal-zebub, meaning literally Lord of flies, perhaps even Lord of dung. Apparently the Philistines thought that their Baal controlled these pests, the flies in the land. I suppose that gave him great honor in their eyes. But anyway, he sends them after this Baal-zebub to find out, am I going to get well or not? He had learned nothing from his parents' mistakes. So Elijah is commissioned in response. We see that in verses 3 and 4, 2 Kings 1. An angel intervenes and goes to Elijah. It says, "Rise up, go to meet these messengers." He has to go out and intercept them before they can even make this inquiry about Baal-zebub. And here's what they're supposed to ask. Is it because there's no God at all in Israel that you're going to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore, this is what Jehovah has said. As regards the couch upon which you've gone up, you will not come off it, because you will positively die. So Elijah goes and he obeys. He intercepts the messengers. He sends them right back to Ahaziah with this message. You are not going to get well, ever. You're going to die on that very same sickbed. Well, Ahaziah is disturbed, of course. He asks who this was, and they describe him. And he knows immediately that it's Elijah, just by having his garb described. It reminds us of what a simple man Elijah was. He kept his life simple, even in a literal sense. Certainly wasn't true of Ahab or his son Ahaziah. You couldn't have described them by describing one set of garments, right? They no doubt had more than you could count. And it doesn't mean for us that we should only have one suit of clothes. No, please. We want more than that. But again, a key to Elijah's endurance is that he kept his life simple. As Jesus said, keep your eye simple. And that's a good contrast between him and Ahab and Ahaziah. Anyway, Ahaziah hears this message, and again, instead of humbling himself, he's infuriated, just like his mother. Right? Verse 9, he sends after Elijah a chief of 50 with his 50. What does this mean? He wants to arrest him, apparently to put him to death. So we see there in verse 9, the chief goes up to him. It says Elijah was sitting upon the top of the mountain. And this chief speaks to him and says, "Man of the true God, the king himself has spoken. Do come down." Smart guy, huh? Ordering this prophet of Jehovah with these words, threatening him with a show of force, his 50 soldiers around him at the foot of this hill. And the old man is apparently by himself, or perhaps just with Elisha by his side. What bullies. Well, Jehovah responds in kind. He tells Elijah to bring forth a judgment upon these men. In verse 10, Elijah spoke to the chief and said, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from the heavens and eat up you and your 50. And fire came descending from the heavens and went eating him up and his 50. Tragic waste of life. What stupid men for acting on these orders. Again, this sycophant mentality, right? Doing what they're told, even though it means going against the creator of the universe. And what a waste of life. 51 men dead as a result. We might say they were stupid, and fairly so. But allow me now to introduce you to, I think, the stupidest man in the Bible. Now, you may say somebody else could compete for this distinguished title, but I think this fellow goes towards the top of the list. It says that Ahaziah sent again to him another chief of 50 with his 50. In turn, he answered and spoke to him. Now remember, here he is at the foot of this hill. There are 51 charred corpses lying scattered on the ground. His predecessor had been fool enough to order the man of the true God to come down. Look what this guy does. Man of the true God, this is what the king has said. Do come down quickly. It's not enough to order. Come on, step to it, old man. Can you imagine the disrespect? The servant of Jehovah. And he knew full well what Elijah had been used by Jehovah to do in the land. And yet he acted this way anyway. Stupid. And so Elijah answered and spoke to them and said, again, just as before, let fire come down. And it came down. and another 51 men destroyed. Now Elijah's not a vindictive man, and this did not make him rejoice, we can be sure. He was a compassionate man. And this is a discouraging tragedy to see people act this stupid. Now I've used that word a number of times, and you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, that's kind of a hard word. But I use it advisedly, because when we say stupid, and the Bible uses the word, it's not talking about a low IQ. In Jehovah's eyes, let's face it, none of us are really going to impress him with our smarts, right? Stupid in the Bible, according to the Watchtower, means insensible to moral truths. Stupid. And these men certainly qualified for that adjective. Stupid. And yet, how discouraging to Elijah to see them act this. In the face of all of the evidence, could you have more evidence that this was not a wise course? And yet they went right ahead and did it. It's discouraging. And it can be hard for us, to endure when we see people around us act in a way that we know is stupid. People being insensible to moral truths. For instance, going ahead and engaging in immorality, despite all the counsel against it, knowing that it is stupid. It's going to bring disaster to the family, disaster to the two involved or more, disaster to the relationship with Jehovah. And yet sometimes against all such counsel, the person just willfully will go ahead. And if we love Jehovah and we love this person, oh, that's tough, isn't it? It's discouraging. How do we endure? One clue is to imitate Elijah's example. Where did these 51 men find him each time? It says he was sitting on top of the mountain. Now what do you think he was doing up there? Was this just a camping trip? No. As we know Elijah studying his life course, it's very clear that he loved to be alone with Jehovah. After the victory on Mount Carmel, what did he do? It says he went up alone into the mountain to pray. No doubt he and Elisha, perhaps with him, were doing something very similar, meditating, studying, being alone with Jehovah. And that's so important for us, friends. We can't necessarily get to the top of a mountain every time we want to be alone with Jehovah, but we can manage to be alone with him, and we should, perhaps every single day, buy out some time where we are alone with him, to speak to him, confide our feelings to him, meditate on his word, be alone with our God Jehovah. As we do that, our relationship with him becomes stronger, and the stupidity of others around us will never come between us and our loving God Jehovah. We must keep that relationship strong. It will help us to endure. Well, happily, the third chief who was sent out by this stubborn Ahaziah is a little bit smarter in a spiritual sense than his predecessors. Verses 13 and 14 says that he went up and came and bent down upon his knees in front of Elijah and began to implore favor of him and to speak to him, "Man of the true God, please let my soul and the soul of these 50 servants of yours be precious in your eyes." Now there's a change of tone. Isn't it true? And of course they were precious in Elijah's eyes. They were precious in Jehovah's eyes. And of course they were spared. Jehovah, through an angel, let Elijah know that it would be safe to go with them and actually go to Ahaziah face to face and deliver that self-same judgment message that he was not going to survive this illness and he would die there. That's assignment number 1, carried out faithfully. Assignment number 2, it's time to pass the torch and move on. 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 1, we see Elijah and Elisha on a journey together. They're walking along. We see in verses 2 and 3, Elijah says to Elisha, "Sit here, please, because Jehovah himself has sent me clear to Bethel." In other words, you stay here, I'll go on by myself. How does the younger man respond? Elisha said, "As Jehovah is living and as your soul is living, I will not leave you." Beautiful example. Does it remind you of Ruth and Naomi? Right? Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. I will not leave you. Or how about Peter when he said to Jesus, "Lord, where would we go away to?" Right? Loyal love is defined in the Bible as love that is attached to its object until all purposes in connection with it are fulfilled, right? That's the kind of love that Elisha has, and that's why he passes this test. Elijah several times does the same thing, testing his endurance, his loyal love And Elisha faithfully sticks by this older man. And this friendship continues right to the very end. Because of that, Elisha gets to see Elijah's final miracle. Verses 7 and 8 of 2 Kings 2. It says there that in the view of these 50 sons of the prophets, that Elijah and Elisha stood by the Jordan. Elijah takes up his official garment, wraps it up, and strikes the waters. And this mighty river, the Jordan, is divided, splits, so that the two men can walk across on dry ground. Spectacular miracle. Not far from where Joshua, 500 years before, was allowed to perform a similar miracle. And a beautiful reminder for Elisha that Jehovah's Spirit is firmly with Elijah right to the end. And that no doubt gave the younger man some real confidence. Notice, though, that side point. 50 sons of the prophets were watching. Who were they? One of the Society's older publications, Let Your Name Be Sanctified, mentions that these sons of the prophets were evidently organized into schools of prophets, and how those schools had blossomed and been blessed by Jehovah. So these 50 individuals were just in one of those schools, perhaps in other towns. There were similar ones. Elijah put in charge of them. And so he is in charge of a program to promote and spread pure worship in the land. Jehovah's blessed it. We might just ask ourselves, how much would Elijah have missed out on if he had died when he had wished to die some years earlier? What wonderful things he would have missed out on. You see, Jehovah really did bless the work. And he clung to life. Fortunately, he endured. And this is just one of the many rewards he receives as a result. In verses 9 and 10, Elisha now makes a request of the older man. He knows that he's about to part from him. He doesn't know just how. But before he goes, he asks this. Elijah humbly asks him in verse 9, "Ask what I should do for you before I'm taken away." And Elisha says in response, "Please that 2 parts in your spirit may come to me." This doesn't mean that he wants to have double the Holy Spirit that Elijah ever had. Some make that mistake because Elisha ends up performing twice as many miracles as his predecessor. But that's not what he's asking. What he's asking is for the firstborn son's portion. In any family, the firstborn son had the largest inheritance. It was called the double portion. What was the purpose of that? Well, the firstborn son was going to carry the heaviest responsibility. He was going to be in charge of the family. He was going to be the new patriarch, in effect. So he needed the largest inheritance so that he could carry that responsibility forward faithfully. Similarly, that's what Elisha wants. He is evidently going to be left in charge of this work, these sons of the prophets, these schools, this spreading of pure worship in the land. So he asked for that firstborn son's portion, that inheritance. Elijah's response, characteristically, is a humble one. He doesn't say, "Oh, sure, I can take care of that for you." No, he says, "You've asked a difficult thing. If you see me when taken from you, it will happen that way. If you do not, it will not happen." In other words, he humbly leaves it in Jehovah's hands and doesn't take it upon himself. Again, a beautiful example for elders, though. Be willing to pass on training, responsibility to younger men. Paul advised that in 2 Timothy 2:1 and 2 about helping others to be adequately qualified. A beautiful example, brothers, because when we do that, we should view that time and training as money in the bank. These younger men can lift some of the responsibility eventually off of our shoulders. But that brings us to the climax of this assignment. Goodbye. It's a farewell. Verses 11 and 12. It says, "It came about that as they were walking along, speaking as they walked." Isn't that a lovely picture of these 2 faithful men? The older man, no doubt, telling the younger man of what lies ahead of him and some of the responsibilities, encouraging him, no doubt. And then look what happens. "Why, look, a fiery war chariot and fiery horses, and they proceeded to make a separation between the both. And Elijah went ascending in the windstorm to the heavens. All the while Elisha was seeing it, and he was crying out, 'My father, the war chariot of Israel and his horsemen.' And he did not see him anymore. Consequently, he took hold of his own garments and ripped them into 2 pieces." You know, historians will tell you that Orville and Wilbur Wright were the first men to fly. They're wrong. And not even the first balloonist could be described as the first one to fly. It would be Elijah. What that must have been like, we can scarcely imagine. As these two faithful men are walking along, this thing comes rushing, roaring down out of the sky, comes swooping in so close that it says it makes a separation between them. So Elisha has to run to the side. And there it is, this fiery chariot, fiery horses. Elijah somehow knows what he's supposed to do. It must have been a daring thing, though. He actually gets up into the thing. He climbs into this contraption. And then he must have gripped the sides in sheer terror as it lifted up off the ground. Do you remember your first time in an airplane? It's quite an experience, isn't it, to see the landscape that you're so familiar with suddenly just shrink away below you, and everything that looks so big just dwindles down to the perspective of little toys. And perhaps the older man could just barely hear Elisha's voice as he ran along and cried out as this chariot soared off into the sky. And Elijah could look out over the landscape. There in the distance he could see Mount Carmel, where that spectacular miracle had occurred some years before. Perhaps the palace of Samaria off in the distance where faithless Ahab had lived and died. And perhaps the tears streamed down his cheeks as he thought of the faithful years of service that he had spent in that territory, carrying out that assignment. Where did he go? You know, the churches will teach you this poor old man was carried right up into the upper reaches of the atmosphere, into outer space, and then into heaven itself. I guess to die of asphyxiation before he ended in heaven. What a terrible thing. No, he didn't die. Elisha knew that. He refused to hold a mourning for Elijah. He knew that he wasn't dead. And of course, the Bible tells us, Jesus himself in John 3:13 says, no man has ascended into heaven but the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. Nobody ever went to heaven before Jesus went to heaven from the earth. So what does it mean then that he went, it says he ascended into the heavens? Well, the heavens in Hebrew refers here not to where Jehovah lives, but the heavens where the birds fly and the clouds float, right? The sky. The chariot lifted him up into the sky and carried him off to another assignment. It carried him some miles down south to the two-tribe kingdom of Judah. Elisha had to continue the work now alone without this dear older man, and that might have been sad for him. He surely missed the old man. But we need to remember that to this day, Jehovah's chariot does still sometimes bring a separation between faithful servants of Jehovah. Sometimes parents will send their faithful children off to Bethel, right? Or sometimes a beloved elder will move to another congregation or to serve where the need is greater. In effect, Jehovah's chariot, his organization, has made a separation between faithful people. Isn't it true? And we need to know that, as Elisha surely knew, if we endure to the end, those friendships will be reunited. In every case, we know that. We have eternity together as friends. As Elijah and Elisha, no doubt, will walk the earth again together as friends. But that brings us to the final assignment, number 3, Elijah's last assignment. And what is it? I might illustrate it this way. Dear old brother in our congregation, former congregation in Brooklyn Heights, maybe you knew him, Brother Booth on the governing body. When he was up in his 90s, he was infirm and often bedridden. And our circuit overseer visited him once and asked him to give a prayer at an upcoming convention. And Brother Booth happily agreed. And then he started reminiscing about how much he used to be able to do at conventions and so forth, and in the service. And the more he reminisced, the sadder he got. And tears started streaming down his cheeks as he said, I just can't do what I used to do. And the dear circuit overseer, bless his heart, he cried right along with him. But he said to him, Brother Booth, you can still carry out your most important assignment of all. And that got Brother Booth's interest, and the circuit overseer said, endure to the end. That's what Jesus said we all have to do, isn't it? The one who endures to the end will be saved. And Brother Booth loved to hear that, and he certainly did just that. And that's Elijah's last job, to endure to the end. He disappears from the account in 2 Kings, but we pick up the thread in 2 Chronicles chapter 21. 2 Chronicles 21, we see that Elijah now is down in the southern two-tribe kingdom of Judah. He has to send a letter of judgment to this wicked king Jehoram. He is Ahab's son-in-law. He married Athaliah. the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. Let her influence him, just as had happened in Ahab and Jezebel's family. And this man murdered his own 6 brothers and his family. He spread false worship in the 2-tribe kingdom. He too needs judgment. So Elijah sends a letter of judgment. He's in a humble position down here in Judah. He's not in the limelight as he was before, but he's enduring to the end. He writes this letter of judgment, and it is a horrible one. He has to tell Jehoram in the letter that he's going to die a terrible death. His intestines will come out. He will have no honorable burial. And as it happened with all of Jehovah's messages, this one too came true. Verse 20 of chapter 21 of 2 Chronicles is a chilling passage there. It says that Jehoram went away without being desired. I think that's far worse than his horrible death, is this horrible epitaph. What a terrible thing to have to say about a man, that when he left, nobody cared, nobody missed him, nobody wants to see him again. What a tragedy, what a waste of his life. And it's a good contrast, though, with Elijah, because we don't know when or exactly how Elijah went away in death. We don't know if illness took him or the gradual old age process took him. We don't know if he was executed by a vengeful Jehoram for this message. We don't know. But what we do know is that he did not go away without being desired. No. Elisha missed him. Those sons of the prophets missed him, loved him. Jehovah, Jesus Christ, loved him, missed him. Just as Job could say with confidence that Jehovah would yearn to see him again one day in the resurrection. Surely Jehovah yearns to bring back Elijah in the resurrection one day, as he did not go away without being desired. And it's because of a simple thing. He endured to the end. His love of Jehovah was loyal, and he never let it go. And so Jehovah's love in response was just as loyal. So we might just ask ourselves that final question, will we endure to the end? If we're ever in a difficult time, a time of depression, of low spirits, will we do what Elijah did? Will we seek out and accept the comfort that comes from Jehovah, the comfort that comes from the Scriptures, from Jehovah's visible organization, from our brothers and sisters? Will we seek out that comfort? Will we benefit from it? Will we learn, as Elijah evidently did, to focus not on our fears, which will just make our faith dwindle, but focus on our hope and dwell on that? Will we learn, as Elijah surely did, to defy this teaching that Satan wants us to swallow, this idea that we're worthless, of no value to anyone? Will we see that as a satanic lie, as we should? If so, that will help us to endure to the end. Like Elijah, will we seek close and loyal friendships among people who love Jehovah like we do? That surely will help us endure to the end. Like Elijah, will we refuse to let the wickedness, the corruption, even the stupidity of others get in between us and our relationship with our beloved Heavenly Father? Like Elijah, will we continually delight in teaching others the truth about Jehovah and setting goals to teach better and more effectively? As we do all these things and continue to endure, one thing is sure: our love for Jehovah will continue to grow, and His love for us will remain constant, and it too will grow. We will be loved, and we will feel loved, and our love for Jehovah will make one thing positive. There's no doubt that if we love Jehovah with our whole heart, our whole soul, our whole mind, as Elijah did, we will, like him, endure to the end.